rainy day in London today, so let's go inside and play some poker. About 5 hands into the session, I look down at pocket 3s under the gun. That is quite a loose open, but I think I can pull it off, so I raise it up to 7. I get called by a lag in the hijack, and we go heads up to the flop. It comes ace, 10, 4. I could c-bet, but basically I'm kind of in give-up mood. But he checks back, and then look at this turn. We now have a set, and so we have to go for value. I go with a small overbet to 20, and we get snap called on this river. Yes, 5-7 gets there, 5 deuce gets there, but I do not think that he has that. So what I can do now is I have 2 options. I can either check and let him, well, either bluff off clubs or maybe value bet an ace, but I thought that wasn't the best option because he could have bluffed a bit earlier, and if he has a weak ace, he might just check behind because he doesn't trust me. So I thought the better option is to just go for an overbet myself, and if he has a weak ace, he might talk himself into calling. So that's what I do, and he looks quite disgusted and says that he was thinking of raising me, but now he was worried whether he should even call. In the end, he did call, and he showed down ace 10 for flop 2 pair. He got quite unlucky, and then he did pay me off. So we're continuing with our theme of loose hands that we play, but I had been at the table for 20 minutes now, and I noticed there were quite a few fish and whales there, including the big blind, who was a big whale, but even the under the gun player didn't seem to be a crusher, so he opens to 7, a fish, and under the gun +1 calls. And yes, there was one aggressive player behind me, but I thought I would try to just call with 9-8 suited, which is normally not something I would recommend, especially so early, but because there were so many passive players and big whales in there, I thought that I could try this, and indeed both blinds call, and we go 5 ways to a flop, and we even flop a flush draw. Now the under the gun player bets 10 into a pot of 35, so at this point, especially after the under the gun +1 calls, I will definitely never fold my flush draw. I only called, the blinds both fold, and look at this, we not only flop our flush but even have a gut shot to the straight flush, and now the under the gun player bets 40, so he is sizing up. The under the gun +1 player folds, and at this point for a brief moment I considered raising, but then I just called because the under the gun player sized up. Because the flush came in and he sized up, that looked really weird to me, so I thought maybe he does have a flush and it would be consistent with how he played it. However, probably not a very big flush, but we'll get to that later because I call, and the river is a complete blank, and he now goes 200 into 145. So notice the bet pattern. He started off really small on a flush draw, then when the flush hit, he sized up, and now he overbets the river. So how good is our 9 high flush? And you might think this is like really crazy to even consider folding, or you might be in the other camp and say the way he has played it, he must have the nut flush, and so this is a snap fold for you. Well, I'm somewhere in between, but closer to the fold, and normally with this sort of a size pattern, I just think my flush will not be good, because what is he representing here? He is representing a flush, and he's representing a really good flush. But now look at the card distribution, and this is the reason that got me thinking. Look at this. So the ace of hearts and the 10 of hearts are on the board, so which means that if he has a really good flush, that's king jack of hearts, king 10 of hearts, but either way, all 3 of those hands would be gut shots to the royal flush. The casino where I played this hand, they have a promotion. They pay £500 for a royal flush. So that means that most players who have that, first of all, they might not even c-bet the flop, and then they would play the turn quite passively because they don't want to blow everyone out of the pot and miss out on the promotion. So that combined with the fact that the king jack or king queen of hearts was second pair on the flop, there are a lot of players who would still bet that and maybe bet it small, so it's not like a telltale sign, but just altogether the combination of these factors made me suspicious, and so I decided to call. He announces a flush, and to my massive surprise, it was the 7 high flush. So we won this hand with our 9 high flush, and I would never have expected him to have a flush that is that small. So that was a massive polarization error on his part. It was basically a bluff because he almost got me to fold my 9 high flush, but very poorly played on his part, and I was glad to win such a big pot. So far we can't complain about how the deck has hit us. Now we open ace queen off and a passive fish in the big blind calls us. The flop comes 999, please help. The passive fish now checks, and with my ace queen we can check back, but I thought I can get some value if I bet really small. He calls. The turn is really good for us. Queen, we now have the full house. He checks, we bet 15, but to my surprise the passive fish now raises me and alarm bells start ringing at this point. However, he could also have a queen, or maybe he just overvalues something like pocket tens, or who knows, maybe he's just in a bluffing mode because he thinks that I can't have much on this board. But alarm bells are definitely ringing when I call this turn check raise. The king on the river is not great, but shouldn't really help him. And when he bets, my first instinct was to fold, but then I looked at the pot odds. Because he didn't make it really big, if he had overbet or bet closer to pot, I would have considered folding seriously. But at this point, I'm thinking there is still a lot of queen X in his range. There shouldn't be a lot of king X. Obviously, he can have a 9, but I still think I'm good. Plus, there could be a few bluffs. There could be spew still with a hand like 10s or jacks or 8s or whatever, because lol, he has a full house. So I flicked in the call and I was shown the quad 9s. So reverse implied odds with a queen there on the turn. So this hand, an interesting one, and I will probably get some stick for it, but I will still show it. I raise king queen off under the gun. So we have a hyper aggressive lag who is just running like God at the moment. He calls. At this point, he had played about 80% of hands, and later in the session he played really 100% of hands that got dealt to him. So just keep that in mind. And now the button calls as well. So we go 3 ways to a flop. We're out of position on king 7-4. This is not as great a board as you might think, especially out of position against 2 players. So that is why I didn't want to c-bet, although this probably is a high c-bet hand, but against these 2 players, and as I said, the cutoff is a hyper aggressive lag, so I thought I could go on a bluff catching mission against him rather than betting and then potentially getting raised and then having to make big decisions in big pots with top pair. So I check, but it checks through. Now the 8 comes. The board has gotten a bit worse, so I could start betting, but I thought, I don't know what I thought actually, to be honest. I just didn't do it. So I check, but it checks through again. And now when the 10 comes, I think at this point I really have to go for value. So I go 25 into 33. And now the hyper aggressive lag raises me, button folds. And look at this raise. It's just a bit bigger than the min raise, and because I have underwrapped my hand so much and I'm getting such great odds, I call. Although at this point, although he is quite a bluffer, I don't think he would bluff that small. He tends to go bigger when he bluffs, so I think I probably lose to something like 2 pair, but I still have to call. So I call and I get shown 9-6 for the straight, and yes, I totally allowed him to get there. We have king queen again. This time it's suited. There is a limp. We raise it to 10. A really bad player on the button calls, small blind calls, big blind calls, and the limper calls. So 5 ways to this flop. Jack 8-7 rainbow. It almost checks through, but then the really bad short stack player makes it 10. We have the big blind call, who is that hyper aggressive lag. The under the gun limper folds, and now we have 2 overs, a backdoor straight draw, and we have to call 10 to win 70. So at this point, yes, you can fold, but I thought I can call, and that's what I did. And we do improve to the king. I briefly considered whether I should donk now, but I thought I would just check and let the fish on the button do his magic. He now jams for his remaining 54, big blind folds, and I think this is an easy call. The pot is now 134. We only have to call 50, so we only have to be good just over 30% of the time. We have top pair, and I think there is enough spew going on there with a hand maybe like Jack 10, Jack 9, 9-8, something like that. But we lose to the flopped straight. And speaking of reverse implied odds, once again, if the king hadn't come on the turn, we wouldn't have lost this. I could also say if I hadn't called the flop, but I still think the call on the flop was not that bad, and I got unlucky once again, although you can say that it's again in my own making, but I still think I got unlucky in this one. This was another frustrating hand. There is a straddle. We're on the button with a6 suited. We raise it up, of course. And now that hyper aggro lag, who I was mentioning before, he makes it 38. So this person over the last hour and a half has played 100% of hands and has raised something like maybe 40-50% of hands. I don't know exactly, but he's basically playing every hand and he's hitting pretty much everything. I mean, he's just cleaning up the table. I say that he has a stack of 400 because that's the effective stack, but at this point he had like 1200, which he had spun up from 100 pounds that he bought in. At this point, normally a6 suited is a fold, but against a maniac like him, it might even be a call. And definitely, if he only kind of min clicks it, it is definitely a call. This flop, not great for us, but we have some backdoors going, but he checks. I have no reason to bet now. The turn is a 6, so it definitely improves our hand, but it's nothing but a bluff catcher. And he now bets pot. And this is kind of like, if I look at the pattern back, especially after analyzing the previous hand against him, where he bet small at the beginning when he had something and then bet bigger when he had something. So I should probably have just folded, but I thought he's just so bluff heavy that I called this bet, and I think it's not a mistake to call because we can improve against a lot of his range. So it's fine to call even though he potted it. And then when the river comes with a second 10 and he now goes 105 into 240, again, he's giving us such a good price. And the thing is, again, what I didn't consider is that he would probably have bet bigger if he had been bluffing, but I thought the way he played it, he might not do this with an overpair, so I thought there is a chance that he was bluffing, so I flicked in the call. But now looking at this hand in hindsight, I just really should have noticed the patterns of his betting, and unfortunately I did not, and I spewed quite a bit here because he had pocket queens, although you can't see them, but he did have pocket queens, and he won this hand, a pretty big one, against my bluff catcher. At this point, I wasn't playing my best poker, otherwise I might not have done that, because I somehow didn't realize that this is a passive recreational player who raised in this spot in the hijack. I have ace-8 suited. This is a 3-bet, of course, but not against this kind of player necessarily, so maybe this was a mistake. He calls. Flop is king 10-9. We have the nut flush draw. It's good for our range. Definitely going to c-bet. I do that. Small c-bet is fine. The passive rec calls. This turn is amazing for us. It now gives us an open-ended straight draw to go with our flush draw, and potentially the ace is also good. When he checks, I decide to check, and I think this is something solver does 100% of the time, because it would be catastrophic to bet now and then get jammed on with so much equity. Yes, we would probably call it off, but we wouldn't love it. So that's why it's important to take your equity and just check back and go to the river and see this total blank and be disgusted. And when he checks again, I have a decision. I can either give up, because I don't think I have that much showdown value with my ace-8, or I can try to fold him off a hand, like something like 8s, 6s, obviously not 7s, but 6s, 5s, 4s, maybe jack 10, maybe queen 10, maybe even ace queen or ace jack. There are quite a few possibilities, and never mind that I have the flush draw. I think it's not that important, and so I went for a healthy bet on the river, and I got snapped off by king queen suited. So it turns out it wasn't actually that bad to 3-bet pre-flop. We got called by a weaker hand out of position, even though that is of course a call, and then we just got unlucky with a run out. And on the river, I think you can go either way, but I still don't think it was that bad of a bet. Can we finish this session on a more cheerful note? Let's see. We have a loose recreational player in the cutoff raising to 10. We have a mandatory 3-bet with a7 suited against him. He calls, and the flop comes 9-5-5. So again, a flush draw in a 3-bet pot. He checks, and this is a board that I would either play a big bet or a check. I decide to go for the big bet with so much equity, and he now does this. So he had about 235 in his stack, and he check raises me to 160. So that alone looks pretty fishy to me. And then the other thing is, what kind of hand would he do this with? Well, not with pocket 9s, not with a 5. I just don't think he would do that. He would most likely slow play with a monster. So he doesn't have a monster. What else could he have? Well, he could have 6s, 7s, 8s, maybe 10s, maybe even jacks or queens or something like that. But against all those hands, I have a lot of equity, because I have the 9 outs to the flush, and then I also have the ace, so that's another 3 outs, that's 12 outs. So we are close to about 50% if he has any of those hands. And if he has another flush draw, then we're obviously ahead of that flush draw. He might just spew or have 8-7 or 7-6 or something like that. So this is a mandatory continue, whichever way you want to do it. Because he had so little behind, I thought I could just jam, and if I'm lucky, he might even fold if he had the complete bluff. And note that even the complete bluff has quite some equity against me, so I would be delighted if he folded. So I jammed. He looks a bit disgruntled but calls, and he had the jack 8 offsuit, so he basically had absolutely nothing. But as I said, he still had some equity, although not a lot. He only had 4 outs because the Jack of Hearts and 8 of Hearts would be my outs, but he still had 4, so that gives him about 16 to 17%. We ran it twice and I won the first one, but he hit an 8 on the second one, so we chopped this one. Very annoying once again, but what can you do? We made the right decision at least.